Okay, we're going to first, to start making our first lesson, I'm using Keynote, which looks like this. It'll show me all the most recent things that I've created, and I'm going to click on this plus button right here to start a new presentation. Um, and I'm just going to go with the basic white, sort of like a whiteboard. I'm also going to get rid of the first few pre-made boxes that they have. And I'd like to give this slide and presentation a title. Click on presentation up here. I'm going to rename it exponents. All right. And if I click on this plus button, I'm going to be able to select from making a table or chart, and there's lots of different options within here. Um, Over here is where we can turn those into graphs, and there's, some pretty good options in there, different color schemes and whatnot. Most of the time, I'm going to be using this box, which is my shapes and text box and line, and this box right here, which will let me put in equations or videos, things like that. So I'm going to insert a text box and click and drag my text box up here, sort of give it a preset size, and I'm going to name this exponents. And I'd like to make the font a bit bigger, so if I go over to my paintbrush icon at the very top, I can do things like change the font, the size of it. Let's see, maybe I'll go with Chalk Jester, make it bold, make it rather large. And we'll see when we get to the Edpuzzle video interface why it's best if things are fairly large on these slides. So I'll make this sort of large. And next I'd like to add an animation. So if I do a right click on this text box, I can go down to animate here, and I'm going to choose an animation by saying build in, add build in. And I'm going to make it a simple keyboard so it's as if this were being typed on command. So that seems a little slow for me. Now that I've selected keyboard, I'm going to click on it again, and I'm going to change the duration to about a second and a half, and I can preview what that looks like here. So yeah, that's a little bit faster and it's a little bit nicer. And so I'm sort of done with this blue bar at the top tells me that I'm still in my animation menu. I'm sort of done with that. Up here, you'll see the list of the order of different animations that's happening, the build order, and we're gonna mess around with that in a moment. But for now, I'm done, so I'm just sort of gonna go back to my original. And I'm gonna use my Apple Pencil now to just tap on the screen and it will initiate a drawing. So I'm going to, first of all, I want to draw. I'm going to make my line a little bit thicker. I'm going to change my color to a blue. I feel like blue is kind of a nice, calm color to start with. And so say that I just want to illustrate the fact that with an exponent, I have two twos being multiplied together, and I'm actually going to change my color. Well, let's keep it all blue, and we'll see how we can change colors after the fact. So I'm going to say 2 times 2, and now I actually get to see where this little loop lasso bit comes into play. So I'm going to click on my loop lasso, and I'm going to circle my dot, because I'd like my dot to actually be a different color than my twos. I'll make that one black, sort of having my operations symbols being one color and my values being a different color. Um, so you'll notice that the color of the selection wheel down here is not a solid dot anymore. It is a hollow circle. And if I tap on that, I can actually go back in and change the color of whatever I've lassoed in retrospect. So we changed that. You can also click and drag and sort of move this around if you don't like it in the right place. Or I could, maybe I'd like this one sort of move down a little bit. I can do that. Just rearrange it kind of nicely to where I'd want. And I'd like to say that 2 times 2 is the same thing as 2 squared, but I'd like to sort of show that in action. So I'm going to say that 2 times 2 is, well, first of all, I'm going to separate each one of these pieces. So I'm going to say separate. And if you don't see what I did there, I just used the lasso, I circled it, and that menu automatically pops up and you can pick separate again. And the last one, since the first two have been separated and the last two is the only thing that I haven't separated, you'll see that if I try to separate this one, that option's gone because it's already separated. So if we actually leave our drawing, this blue bar at the top, this drawing menu, and I say do that by saying done, you'll see that I have 3 different individual pieces right there that I can go ahead and um, I can change the size of them. So maybe I'd like to see them a little bit bigger. My 2's at least a little bit bigger. And they're nice sort of guidelines. They show you that we're on the same level right here. And I'm going to move maybe I'll make that a tiny bit bigger as well. But I'm going to move this down. And it'll kind of nicely show you, oh, this is the same amount of space between those two. That's what these 2 yellow arrow segments look like, and the guideline in the middle says that it's centered there. So I'd like my 2 times 2 to look like this. And I'm actually now going to right click on these, or even if you're in the stylus mode where you're not drawing, you can single click on them, and animate pops up right here. So I'm going to say animate, and we have an option when we've drawn things that says line draw. So I'm going to pick line draw. And line draw sort of has an irritating preset function where it draws very slowly. Their preset time duration on any line draw is 4 seconds. So I'm going to go take this down to 1 second so that my 2 sort of looks like I'm drawing it sort of maybe at the same speed that I would normally draw it to, maybe a little bit slower. Sometimes it's nice to go a little bit slower because you're speaking while this is happening. And so that one's set up, and I'm going to go ahead and click on the multiplication sign and do a build in there. And I'd like a line draw to happen there. And you see, again, it's really slow. It's going to happen over 4 seconds. So I'm going to hit this X. So it is my selection, but then tap on line draw again and change the duration down to even less than a second for this. This is a quick little scribble, so I'll make it 0.7 seconds and see what that seems like. Yeah. And last but not least, just click on my last 2, add build in, line draw. I know that it's going to take a while, so I'm going to hit this X button, line draw again, and bring it down to another second. All right. So what we have here, I'm going to hit done on my animations, is we have something that is separated into 4 parts essentially that is going to take 4 clicks to make this happen. So when I go ahead and play this slide, my first click or hit on the space bar or on your remote or whatever you're using makes this exponents kind of type out, and then the second click will make the first 2 be drawn, and then the third click will make the multiplication point be drawn, and then the fourth will make the second 2 be drawn. What I'd like to do, and that's the end of everything on this slide, so when I hit click again, it's going to go back to the edit mode. What I'd like to do is sort of loop or sync up these 3 animations down here by first I'm just going to click on the 2, right click on it, you can bring up the animate, and we're not actually going to change the animation, but now we're going to go up to this list of this build order menu up here, and you can see all the builds. This is typing out exponents on the keyboard. This is drawing my first 2, drawing my multiplication dot, and drawing my second 2. And you'll see that when I click on each one of these, with the exception of the first, because I don't have a I don't have anything before the first one. The menu down here changes. But if I go down to, say, the second one, the first two being drawn, I can start this build on a tap, meaning on tapping my touch screen or my spacebar or my forward arrow or clicking or what have you. But I can also build it at the same time with build one. Build one is my exponents. And if I do that, you'll see that this kind of moves up and joins together with build one, and they'll actually happen at the same time. So I can just go take a look and see how that happens. And you see they're happening simultaneously. That's not what I want to do, but I just wanted to show that that's what that looks like. So with build one means, or with the build above it means that it's going to happen at the same time, and after means it's going to happen right after that's done. So I can, maybe I'll just say I want all of these to happen one after the other. I don't want to have to keep clicking. So for each of these, I'm going to say after, and you'll notice this happens on its own on tap, and I'm going to have each of these come after the previous build. So that everything's going to sort of happen on its own once that first click is initiated. So we'll see what that looks like now by previewing it. So here's my first tap, and then everything I haven't clicked, everything's is just happening within the time increments that I've given it on its own, and now we've got made our way through each of the animations. So there's our first little block of animations. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to show these two factors, these two twos coming together to form a single base. And first I'd like to highlight the fact that there are, I'm going to get out of my animations real quick. And first I'd like to highlight the fact that there are two of them. So I'm going to add another drawing very quickly by tapping with my pencil. And I'd like to change my color to red here to show something different is happening. And I'm going to draw an arrow and an arrow. And I will say that there are two factors. And while we've separated everything previously, it's going to assume probably that these two lines and this word two factors, or these words two factors, it's going to assume that everything in red is part of the last one that I didn't separate. So I actually need to go back and separate them, and I'm just sort of going to draw a circle around all of this. Oops. I'm going to draw a circle around all of it using my mouse here, which is a little bit less convenient. And now I'm going to separate this into its own piece. So now it's going to go back to thinking that every piece is separate. This is separate, this is separate, this is separate, and now this whole thing is on its own. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to animate this by going to animate. I'm going to add in a line draw, and I think 4 seconds might be appropriate for this. Let's see what it looks like when we take 4 seconds to do these. Yeah, 2 lines, and I'll say 2 factors. Very good. And so here's what we're going to do now is I would like to, let me get out of my animations. I would like to duplicate, actually I'm going to copy and paste this to, drag it over here, and copy and paste this. I have a new one. I'm going to copy and paste this. And the danger that when we have copy and paste is that when I go to the animations of these, I actually copied their original animations too, so I'm going to get rid of those. These are already preset with line draw to the same specifications that I had before because I just copied and pasted everything about them. And I'm going to get rid of their animations because I'm actually going to use these as placeholders, and I'm going to do one more set of copy and paste. Let me get out of my animation, and I'm going to copy this 2 again. I'm going to put it right above, and we'll see why in just a moment. So I actually have 3 sets of things happening here, and this is going to be important. I have my original animations, copy and paste. I'm also going to get rid of the animations on this set of copied and pasted items by clicking on their animation and then saying delete, by the way. So here, click on its animation, say delete, and now it doesn't have any animations. It's very problematic when I go and try and view the slide now because anything without an animation is just already going to be there when I start. So that's not what I'm looking for. I need to make these sort of happen in the right order. And you'll see that the order is pretty good so far. I see everything sort of happening at once. And then on the next click, my 2 lines with the words 2 factors in red come underneath those. And here's what I'd like to do. I would like to have this 2 times 2 arrive over where it is now by flying over from here. We're going to sort of animate a shift of everything over. So I'm using what's already in place as sort of a guidepost to where I want it to be. And zoom in a bit. And I'm actually going to use these as they're going to do the flying. So I'd like to put them over their originals exactly, and it sort of snaps into place, so you don't have to worry about, you see, it just sort of did that very quickly. And what I'd like to do now when I'm clicking on these, I'm clicking on the top ones, you'll see they don't have any animation. I'd like for them to just appear. The appear animation makes things happen instantly, and it's nice when something's happening right over a copy of itself. It's just like an extra version appears really quickly. So I'm going to say appear, and that happens in no time. And I'm going to have all 3 of my new items simply appear. And they're all just going to appear, and we won't even notice that they appear because they're appearing on top of something that is exactly the same as them. But you'll see I have 3 new animations here of appear, and I'm going to have them all happen at the same time that this red drawing, this red line draw is happening. So we don't even notice when it's happening. I'm going to say this is happening with the line draw above, and that is happening with the same build 5, and this is happening with the same build 5. And so they're all just going to happen. They're all going to show up without anyone even really noticing that they're there. But it is important that they're there because on the next time, the next round of animations, I would like for this 2 to move over, to be shown sort of duplicating itself and moving over, leaving a copy of itself behind, and flying over to our new location for it, where we're going to see something new happen. So I'm going to say, I'm going to add a middle action. It's not a build-in, it is an action. So the middle one is called add action. And the very first option is create path. So I'm going to say create path. I'm going to use my pencil here because it's more precise, and I get to hold down on this blue dot and create a path to exactly over this one. And this one doesn't snap into place quite so nicely, but it can do most of the way, most of the job. So we're going to see a little bit of a preview of how that works. I actually think that I don't love it moving straight through everything else. So I'm going to say clear, and I'm going to redraw my path to sort of make an arc. So I'm going to draw a path like this, and it's going to make an arc. It can be a little bit swivelly. It's okay. They know that I'm not a perfectionist all the way. And there's an arc right there. And I need to do this with each of my 3 new pieces. So I'm going to say done. That's how it happens. You can also click on motion path and say how long you'd like it to take too. I thought that was a pretty good amount of time. So Let's just double check. Yeah, that's a pretty good amount of time. So 1.75 seconds. That'll be a good thing to remember. Because I'm going to use that same amount of time for everything else. So now I'd like my multiplication dot, my overlay multiplication dot to travel. So I'm going to do add action, create path. Sorry, create path. And for the path that I'm going to create here, I'm going to create a similar arc and have it land on its original. I think that's close enough. Okay, and then hit done. And make sure that it's at the same, see, depending on the length of the path, sometimes they change the time. So I'm going to have this take 1.75 seconds, the exact same amount of time as the first one, and move on to my last piece. So here we go. I'm going to go to add action, create path, and now I'm going to draw my path by dragging that red dot sort of in the same arc pattern to my second two. That looks overlaid well enough. Okay, and I'm going to say done. And I'm going to click on motion path one more time to make sure it has the same amount of time, so 1.75 seconds. Okay, so we have our things that just sort of appeared in lockstep with the red line draw, the two factors line draw. And then they're going to move, and I'd like them to all move at the same time. I wouldn't like them to move in directly following something else. I'd like to be able to control when they move because I'm going to do some talking maybe in between to explain this in the video. So, but I am going to have them move all together. So this build number 9 will be this 2 right here. And it has appeared, and it will have a motion path in build 9. And I'd like 9, 10, and 11 to all happen at the same time. So I'm going to go to 10 and say go with build 9. I'm going to go to 11 and say go with build 9. And we can kind of see this happening. Bear in mind, we haven't done any animations with these. So right now, we're going to see these before anything else because they're just sort of there, but we'll get there. So here's our typing exponents. Here's our immediate after drawing of 2 times 2. And while this next build is happening, I haven't clicked yet, but while this red line draw is happening, we're actually getting 2 clones appearing, or 3 clones, 1, 2, 3, that have already appeared and we just didn't notice it. So now those new copies are ready to move on my next build. So, and they're all happening together. So we'll see them sort of all move over and settle in where they belong there. So now what I'm going to do with these over here is actually make them the ones that stick around. So this requires a tricky bit of building, but what I'm going to do is bring back up my animations menu. So I can just say animate, and I don't actually have to animate this one right now. I just like to look at my build list, my build order. And I'm going to say, okay, well, these 3 items moved over. And what I'd like to do next is have, after these move, I'd like these 3 items to appear. So I'm going to have them appear, and we will barely even notice that that's happening. So appear, and I'm going to X that out just because that's the way that you get it to sort of sink in or set. Click on my dot, add a build in, appear, and there's no preference for appear. You see there's no time signature on it because it just happens instantly. It's just one of those quick things. So I'm going to go to my third piece and click appear, and then hit this X. And so now they're all set to appear. We see them on the most recent builds in our build order. And what I'd like to do is I'd like for these 3 appears, first of all, to all happen together. So I'm going to go to the second one and say go with the first one, and the third one and say go with those first 2. And I'd like for these to happen right after. So build 12, 13 and 14 are happening with build 12 no matter when it goes. And I'd like 12
the first one in that order, to go immediately after this motion path of these previous three. So I'm going to go to build 12 and I'm going to say after build 11. And what we'll notice here, we'll kind of go to um, a full build now, or a full presentation now, is there's nothing on the screen because I have everything coming in orchestrated at different times. And now I have my typing, my immediate writing. I have on next click my two arrows and two factors in red. And I have my migration over here. And immediately after that migration, we have those two, these are appearing. So they just sort of happen without us noticing. Um, and this is important because I'm actually going to go back to these three that move. And our third option right here is add a build out. And once they move, and once these kind of appear over them, I'm going to have our original, our moving pieces go away. So I'm going to say add a build out, and it's going to happen at the very end. And I'm going to say my build out will just be disappear. It's like up here, it doesn't take any time at all. It's going to disappear. I'm going to hit my X, and we'll see that's my most recent build. Now I'm going to go to this, add a build out, disappear, hit my X, and it sort of sinks in. So now there's two. And my third one, build out, disappear, hit my X. And so I have three disappears down here. I'd like them all to happen immediately after all of these appears happen. So first of all, I'm going to have them all happen together. I'm going to hit with, and then go to build 15 and say this needs to happen immediately after build 14. This is a lot of nitpicky animation to ensure that we don't have too many moving pieces, because I'm going to do one last bit of movement that I'd like for it to make sense and not to be clunky or not to leave any pieces behind. So this will be an important step, and hopefully we can see why by the end of this. So I have 2 times 2, and we're talking about two factors. And I'd really like these twos to sort of move together and for this multiplication symbol to disappear so we can get a single base and show that we have an exponent of 2, this red 2 down here. So I need to do a little bit of work. I'm going to get out of my animations. I'm going to go to done. And I'm going to actually go into draw by tapping my pencil on the screen. And I'm not going to mess with this original piece, but I am gonna lasso the two because you can do something cool. You can make your own separate piece out of a smaller part. And I'm just gonna duplicate that because I'm interested in something being exactly the same shape and size as that. So I'm gonna say duplicate. And you'll see I have another 2 down here. I'm gonna move it down here to be safe and tap on it one more time, and I'm gonna separate that one. Okay. So this one is its own. And we'll come back to that. So my next order of business is to have these two twos kind of merge into one. I'm going to actually have this dot be my middle space. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into their animation elements. So I'm going to right click and go to animate. And I'm actually going to have a motion path, their middle action for each of these twos, sort of settling. I'm going to create a path and I'm going to have it settle over the black dot. So it's a pretty good reference right there. I'm going to say done, but I'd like this to take a tad longer than 0.2 seconds. So I'm going to make it happen over like 0.4 seconds. Let's see. I think that's going to be enough. Yeah, yeah, that's a little bit slower. So 0.4 seconds, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. Add action. I'm going to create a path, and I'm going to draw my path, red dot, sort of hovering over the black multiplication dot. I'm going to click done. I'm going to click on motion path again to make it not 0.2 seconds, but 0.4 seconds. And now they're going to take the same amount of time. They're still not happening at the same time. So when I go to my build list, which was here, I'm going to go ahead and make them these bottom two are my two motion paths. I'm going to have them happen at the same time. So we're going to see them happen at the exact same time. And you might be wondering, well, now there's they're on top of each other and there's a big black multiplication dot in the middle of them. So we need to do two things. We need to make one of these twos go away because I didn't draw the exact same two. So I'm actually going to have this two go away. So we have, so many spaces here for build ins and actions and then build outs. So I'm going to add a build out and I'm going to have it dissolve. Dissolve just sort of helps it fade. It's not so abrupt of an exit. I'm going to hit my X so it locks in and hit dissolve again. And I'm going to make it happen pretty quickly. 1 second's a little too long for me. So I think 0.2 seconds is better than 0 seconds where it just sort of disappears. It's sort of a soft exit. And I'm also going to do that for my multiplication dot. So this one doesn't have an action. It's just going to dissolve. And I'm remembering my times here because I'd like to have this happen at the same rate that the other two disappear. So I'm going to say this should take 0.2 seconds. And now we have a couple things. I'd like for these two twos, this two and this two, to move together towards the center. I'd like this two to dissolve and this multiplication dot to dissolve sort of immediately after that. So we have them moving together at the same time with the motion path. And I'd like for these two dissolves to happen at the same time. So I'm going to say build 21 goes with 20. And I'd like for them to happen immediately after these two move. And this makes sense. I don't even have the option of with because I can't dissolve something before its middle action happens. So it's only giving me the option of doing it on its own tap or happening immediately after 19. So now looking at what we've got, well, this 2 is still sort of hanging out down here, but that's okay because we haven't done anything with it yet. We're not completely done, but here's our typing, followed immediately by our writing. We're waiting on the second click for our arrows and more writing. At the same time, we've had copies overlaid on here, and we're going to move them over, and then actually they're going to disappear, and that our whole motion and having those two things disappear happen sort of all at once. So that was really nice because we're trying to illustrate a base of 2, but now we need to bring up this power of 2. And I'd like to show that since this is saying there are 2 of them, I'd like this 2 to overlay this one and fly over here to show 2 to the second power. And so let's complete that, one of the last pieces of the puzzle, by, first of all, zooming in a bit, I'm going to overlay this 2 right here. And I'm going to have it just appear. And honestly, it could appear at any time in all the other builds that we've had. I'm just going to have it happen up here because I think if it appeared right after these dissolved, I would have trouble with it. Well, let's try. Let's just go, actually, let's bring it down. Let's just have it be where they put it. So I'm going to have it happen with everything else dissolving. All right. Next, I'd like for the same 2 to fly using add action and then create path. And I'd like it to fly up here. And we don't have a guide here, but I think that's okay because our multiplication dot is our guide. So there'll kind of be this 2 hanging out right here, and I think it should go right about there. So what I'm going to do is draw a path to sort of have it land right about here and hit done. And I'm going to have this happen immediately after it appears as well. So here's what we're going to see if this works. Let's check the time on this motion path too. It's 1.5 seconds. That's okay. I think that will look fine. So I'm going to click done, and I'm going to play the entire thing. So we're at a blank screen. You know the drill. All this is happening. And so there's a tap here for this. Our next tap is having them fly over. Our next tap, because we had a couple things appear and disappear at the exact same time just now over here. So our next click really will be these two moving together, this disappearing, and this one actually disappearing to show a single base. And we instructed this overlay two to appear and fly over all in the same, all for the same click. So let's see how it goes. So that was pretty cool because we're showing that we have two factors. So this two factors of two. So these twos came together to form a single base, and this two flew over here to show us the degree of the exponent. One last piece, maybe I'll add one more text box and say, this is starting me off on some very small font. Make my font a bit bigger, and I can say, this can be read as 2 to the second power, or 2 squared. And maybe I'd like to say squared is an interesting vocabulary term, so I'm going to make it italics. And I'm not crazy about this star, actually. So, and actually, I think I'd really like this up here. And I would like a box around it. So maybe I'll do I'm going to make this a bit smaller, actually. And now I'm going to add a little dialog bubble. I think those are kind of fun sometimes. So I clicked on the dialog bubble. I'm not crazy about it being just solid black. So when I go over here to this paintbrush, I can say, okay, the fill is going to be, let's make it a little bit darker gray so it kind of stands out. And we'll make it bigger so it'll fit our whole text. And look, it's covering up our text now, but an easy way to do this is just to send this whole text bubble to the back. So when you're in this paintbrush icon, you can go over to Arrange, and it says Move to Back Front right here at the top of Range. And I'm just going to move it all the way to the back, or you can see it doesn't have to move all the way to the back. It just can't be in front of the text. So right here is fine. And what I'm going to do is animate these two things to happen. I'd actually like to make this text bold as well. There we go. So let's center this a little bit more. Okay. So last bits of animation is I'm going to have this text be animated, and I think the keyboard option is really, we've already done it. So I'd actually just like this flip to come in. So I'm going to say flip. I like how this works, sort of. And I'm going to do the same thing to my text bubble. I'm going to add in a flip build. And I'm going to have them happen at the same time. So I'm going to hit X to make it sink in, and then go to my build order and say these two things can happen together. Okay, so this is what we've got so far. It's not the most complex slide. It's not even a full slide, but we've got from a blank screen, and I'm just going to talk through the clicks. Here's click 1, still on click 1. Here's click 2. Here's click 3. Here's click 4. And here's click 5. So that is a very basic intro into using Keynote to animate your slides.